Sudan says no to the deployment of an impartial force in the country. United Nations experts say serious human rights violations have been committed by both sides in the ongoing war. So who will protect the millions of civilians trapped in the conflict? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashem. Ahelbarra. Sudan is facing one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Fighting between the army and its rival, the Rapid Support Forces paramilitary group, has killed tens of thousands of people and forced millions from their homes across much of the country. Reports of torture and rape have surged during the last 17 months, leaving many people feeling desperate and helpless. The United Nations wants to deploy peacekeeping troops, but the government says they are not welcome. The announcement follows an investigation that states both sides have committed abuses that may amount to war crimes. So who will hold them accountable, and what does this rejection of intervention from outside of Sudan mean for its people? We'll explore these issues with our guests in a moment. First, this report by Katia Lopez-Hodian.
Nearly a year and a half of fighting in Sudan has killed more than 20,000 people and forced millions from their homes. The United Nations wants to deploy peacekeeping troops to protect civilians from the conflict between the army and its rival, the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF. But the Sudanese government says UN troops are not welcome. The foreign ministry is loyal to the army, led by General Abdelkhalig al-Burhan, and says it rejects the recommendations of the UN mission, including an extension of an arms embargo. After interviewing more than 180 survivors and witnesses, UN investigators say they found harrowing violations and abuses from both sides that may amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity.
In particular, rape, gang rape by both parties to the conflict. Members of the RSF, in particular, have perpetrated sexual violence on a large scale in the context of attacks on cities in Darfur region and the greater Khartoum area.
Recent talks led by the U.S. and Geneva to stop the fighting were inconclusive. The RSF, led by Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, sent a delegation, but Sudan's military did not. The UN warns the situation is dire.
The gravity of our findings and failure of the warring parties to protect civilians underscores the need for urgent and immediate intervention.
Sudan has suffered one of the world's worst humanitarian crises since fighting broke out in April 2023. The unrest is also fueling a cholera outbreak in areas containing some of the most vulnerable people, and violence against civilians is fueling desperation.
Recently, there was still shelling here. People are scared and fear for the lives of their children. They all gather in one place, with fears of getting hit.
The conflict has devastated much of the country. Now many people in Sudan and elsewhere are concerned no one will be held accountable. Katia Lopez-Hodian, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
Let's bring in our guest in Addis Ababa, Dr. Alaaeldin Nugud, who is a Sudanese activist who was himself detained and tortured at the start of the conflict. In Manama, Abdelkhalig Shaib is a Sudanese international attorney who has advised international organizations on Sudan's constitution and politics. And in Cairo, Dalia Abdelmun'im is a Sudanese political commentator and journalist. Welcome to the program. Alaaeldin, one of the key recommendations of the fact-finding mission is the need to put together peacekeeping forces in Sudan. The government is saying no. Why do you think the government rejects this recommendation in particular?
Okay, thank you, Hisham, for having me in the show, and thanks for all the audience and your and hosting us. I think rejection of the de facto government, or i.e. the SAF, the Sudan Armed Forces, for the recommendation and the conclusion of the fact-finding mission and the report was expected, because from the beginning and the establishing of the fact-finding mission and the resolution of the United Nations Human Rights Council was not welcomed by the SAF or by the de facto government. And the series of rejection of even the last Geneva final statements, and Ahelbarra mentioned that this is nonsense statements, and the rejection of the 11th to 19th June Geneva meeting with Ramtan al-Amamra, the special envoy of Antonio Guterres to Sudan, and the SAF delegate didn't reach any commitment with that. These all conclude that the SAF and its alliance with the military movements and the previous Muslim Brotherhood NCP regime is unwilling to put an end to this fight. And it's obvious throughout the behavior of the SAF or the de facto government in all previous peace talks, their withdrawal from the IGAD, their withdrawal from Jeddah twice, and even the unwelcoming of the last Cairo civilian force meeting was all in favor of this conclusion that the SAF didn't want to put an end to this war and for the protection of civilians. Even the unacceptance to meet Taqaddum, the civilian coalition that aimed to end the war and to protect the civilians.
Abdelkhalig, a statement by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs described the Human Rights Council, quote, political and illegal body, and that the panel's recommendations were basically a flagrant violation of their mandate. How do you see that position by the government?
I think I can understand the position from the government of Sudan, attacking the report, but you cannot say that there's international forums and platforms that you have to deal with internationally when it comes to issues relating to the fact-finding mission and other I would say instruments established by whether the Human Rights Council or the UN Security Council. But let us just look at the mandate of the fact-finding mission itself. I think the fact-finding mission has a specific mandate, and that mandate is of investigative nature rather than just investigative and fact-finding nature rather than just going into the policy-making recommendations. I would look into the comments that have been made by the fact-finding mission to go into policy-making recommendations. I think the issue that we need to look at is that whether recommendations to deploy independent forces falls within the mandate of the fact-finding mission. I don't think it falls within the mandate of the fact-finding mission as established by the Human Rights Council. But again, that policy recommendation itself failed to address how, who, and when, and also this takes us to whether it's easy for you to deploy foreign forces, regardless of the position taken by the government of Sudan. We've seen UNAMID in the past. You need the government to be aligned. It's not just the international community. You need a complex negotiations with the government for you to have such UN peace forces, and UNAMID was part of the United Nations and the African mission. In my opinion, I think they've exceeded their mandate. It's not within their mandate, although the resolution itself that established the Human Rights Council, that resolution that established the fact-finding mission, talked generally about the protection of civilians in relation to the commitments that have been made by both parties in the Jeddah Declaration of Commitment. Again, it's not within their mandate. I think it's a policy recommendation rather than something that falls within their mandate. Okay,
Dalia, irrespective of whether this was within the mandate of the fact-finding mission, could it be that perhaps the rationale of the United Nations team of experts that if you want to stop the insanity in Sudan, the mass killing of civilians, and prevent famine from further expanding, you need to stop the war. To stop the war, you cannot build trust between the two parties. Therefore, the only practical way for aid to be flown into the country is to have a mechanism, and this explains why they want to see peacekeeping forces deployed into Sudan.
First of all, I think the protection of civilians as an issue has never been brought to the table until now. Recently, it's taken precedence. If from the start the protection of civilians was a priority, then maybe there would have been more steps taken, more effective steps and impactful steps taken. The fact-finding mission, first of all, I think it was only for a certain area. They need to expand their mandate to cover the whole of Sudan, because the violations aren't just taking in one part of the country, they're taking part in the whole country, and they're being violated by both sides to the war. Both the RSF and SAF have violated civilians' rights. So they do, I think it's a cop-out, because I don't think either side would agree to a peacekeeping mission, because there is no peace to keep and there is no peace to be found. All the talks have failed. There's never been a proper push to bring an end to this war, or to even talk about the civilian protection. And it's been kind of belatedly taken and half-heartedly taken by the international community. And this is something we in the civil society of Sudanese civil society have been talking about and have been pushing for since day one of the war. And it's belatedly started to have taken precedence. And is it too little, too late? Not really, because like you said, they can halt the further expansion of famine. They can play a part in dealing with the health issues, the cholera that's spreading in the country, the sexual violations that have been perpetrated mainly by the RSF. There's so many violations that have been taking place in Sudan, and they need to be addressed. And I think there needs to be a more efficient manner of how to address these issues.
Alaaeldin, we're talking about Africa's third largest country, with a war that perhaps could be the most destructive now in the world. More than 20,000 people killed, 1/5 of the population forced out of their places. Why is Sudan not getting enough attention?
I think it's because of the coexistence of many other crises in the world, and it's not like just a fight for the Sudan to be missed as such. And many people saying, and even articles in the newspaper and in the media, that is the most huge, the largest and the most forgettable crisis. I think maybe just because of this multiple crisis that's happened in the world, and the engagement of the bigger countries, I'd say, for example, the allies in the West with the Ukraine-Russia war, and right now the Israel-Gaza war. But something just to say or to comment on your guest talks, that the fact-finding mission in Sudan is not a new thing. In 2005, there was a fact-finding mission in Darfur, and the Judge Cassius shift or transferred the report to Kofi Annan at that time, the United Nations. And it was shifted to United Nations Security Council, and then the UNAMID forces came to Darfur, and then it was shifted to the ICC, and accordingly Al-Bashir, Abdurrahim Mohamed Hussein, and Ahmed Haroun were wanted by the ICC. So, and the same people like Mohamed Chandi, the judge or the head, the chairperson of the fact-finding mission, is not a new person to Sudan. He was involved in this Darfur issue before. The most important things in the report, that it shows the big difference of the dealing of the two belligerents with the fact-finding mission, where the de facto government or the SAF didn't welcome or even respond to the 4 times the fact-finding mission contacted them requesting visit to Sudan, while the SAF respond immediately the second day after appointing Mohamed Chandi as a chairperson, and they said. The other thing is that it also has some missing. It missed that in the root causes, it didn't mention that the Muslim Brotherhood or NCP as the real eruptor of this war. And there's a lot of evidence in the media and in many of the interviewers who were there, especially, for example, for me as an instance, that there is a great role of the initiation of this war on the previous regime, the NCP and the Muslim Brotherhood, and in the arbitrary arrest there were many of the arrests, especially my case, because I'm belonging to one of the forces that was in the revolution and working on the change that the Sudanese want. So this war is not just a war for the power, as most people say. No, it's a war against the revolution and against the change by the Muslim Brotherhood and SCP regime.
Abdelkhalig, the team of experts found evidence that suggests that both sides committed crimes that could amount to war crimes and crimes against humanity, that there's been widespread pillage against ethnic groups, particularly the non-Arab communities in Darfur, strings of sexual, gender-based violence assaults, rape, gang rape, harrowing details about atrocities committed across the country. Do we have a mechanism where we can say, if both are to be held accountable, therefore, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and Hamdan Dagalo have to go to jail, either face trial at the ICC?
I think it's we need to differentiate between, first of all, let us address the mandate of the International Criminal Court when it comes to the situation in Sudan. The mandate of the International Criminal Court when it comes to Sudan is very limited to the situation in Darfur. And this is why one of the recommendations put forward by the fact-finding mission is to either expand the mandate of the ICC to include the entire Sudan, or to establish, so to speak, a judicial system that deals with the atrocities that have been committed as part of the conflict. I do not see that an investigation thus far involved the second commander of the RSF in Geneva. So the ICC's investigation is limited to Darfur. But let me take you a step back. I mean, if you look at the investigations themselves, you cannot just weigh in between the RSF and SAF. And this is factual. This is not my opinion. This is factual. Even if you look at the report itself, it has two paragraphs at the very end dealing with the recommendations, paragraph 111 and 112. And if you read 112, it deals with the reasonable grounds to believe that SAF and allied forces have committed the war crimes, and then you compare it with the other paragraph about the RSF. It is very extensive paragraph on the RSF that it used language that intentionally directing attacks against civilians and population, intentionally directing attacks against persons and objects involved in humanitarian assistance, and then intentionally ordering displacement of the civilian population for reasons related to the conflict. I think so. The word intentional is mentioned so many times with the RSF. So there's no way to weigh in between the two, not even for any political, I would say, objectives. This again takes me to the fact that if you're investigating this, the fact-finding mission, although did not visit Sudan, although they've requested to visit Sudan, and the de facto government or the government of Sudan rejected their request, you cannot say that the cooperation by the RSF suggests that they are not committing atrocities, because this is what they've done. They've done it with the designated expert on human rights in Sudan, with NUSF. They've done it with Ramtan al-Amamra. They've done it with the fact-finding mission. But on the ground, when you look at the ground, you would see people fleeing areas controlled by the RSF to areas controlled by the SAF. And this is the irony that Sudanese they have to go through. So the displacement in the beginning, when it came from Khartoum to to Jazeera, and then to Sinnar, and then to Galbari, it's because the RSF are committing these atrocities. So this is a fact, and these are reports by the international, Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and everyone else, and even the UN panel of experts when it dealt with that situation, which the fact-finding mission met with, and they documented that in their report. They've said the same thing. So I think it's a bit. Misleading to suggest that they could be equated, and the amount of crimes that they committed, definitely those crimes committed by SAF and RSF. But then if you put them in a scale, you would reach definitive conclusions as to the amount and the magnitude of the crimes committed by the RSF.
Dalia, there is a sense of urgency here, because the report blames both parties for blocking access to humanitarian aid. Many experts are warning that 2 million people will die by the end of this year. and that by 2027, 6 million Sudanese will die of famine. How do you see Sudanese moving forward against the backdrop of all these challenges and problems happening on a daily basis, with the West apparently disengaged for the time being?
I mean, Sudan has always the notion of nafir, which is social unity, social mobilization, has always been present in Sudan, because the Sudanese state has never supported the Sudanese civilian. So we've always stepped in as Sudanese, to help each other. And this is what's happening right now. But they're at breaking point because funds are running low. They're being, targeted by both the RSF and SAF, the volunteers, and those on the ground who are working to, make sure the community kitchens are able to provide, essential, just basic food for those in the besieged areas or those who don't have access to food and to health resources and so on. So it's always been the Sudanese people who've stepped up and stepped in when needed. But there needs to be more help towards them. They need to be acknowledged as a major source of aid for the people. They may not be international agencies, but they are working on the ground. So they need to be acknowledged, they need to be recognized, they need to be helped, aided. At the same time, I think there needs to be more penalties or penalization if the safe corridors are not kept, are not maintained, are not sustained by either side. Mm-hmm. And we know that both sides have looted aid convoys, recently, I think at WFP warehouses where there was a report that the RSF looted medicinal supplies of the value of $500 million from the state of Khartoum alone. And it's something that hasn't been addressed, needs to be addressed. And I think the stakeholders who can have an influence on both sides should be, urged to persuade both the RSF and SAF to allow the humanitarian aid to get through. Because like you said, it's at breaking point. Sudan is at breaking point if it hasn't already been broken. And it's only going to get worse.
Okay.
There is no light at the end of the tunnel, unfortunately.
Let's explore different aspects of the fact-finding mission. Alaaeldin, the report has been documenting widespread arrest and detention conducted by both the SAF and RSF. You were detained yourself in the past. Give us a sense of how the experience was, briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's a very nasty, difficult experience. And the report also was deficient in detailing this issue. I was detained by the military intelligence of SAF from my house just because I'm calling for the war and calling to stop the war and exposing the real eruptor of the war by evidence that was there throughout the days and the weeks before the war erupted, and that the members of the Muslim Brotherhood, NCP, were going in Ramadan, iftar and meals, and saying that we are going to change this even by force, and the framework agreement will not go to reach its ends, and the political process is not going to reach the end, and threatening the FFC and all the civilian forces that were there. I was taken to the military intelligence, and there I saw and heard, I was interrogated by the Muslim Brotherhood people and members in the military jail. I was jailed for 15 days. I saw the racial discrimination. 6 or 7 of the Darfur Arab tribes people were taking just food materials to Abdelkhalig. They were brought down from their cars. The cars were burned. And afterwards, 3 or 4 of them were killed and buried in the military prison. I gave all this to the fact-finding mission, and I put even the photo that they took for me after the torture and after the beating, and they sent to General Kabashi, second command in the south, and he sent it back to our fellows in the FFC. And also important to say that even right now, there is a strange law that was issued by the de facto government and the SAF in the control area that's called the Strange Faces Law. And this, unfortunately, is a racist law that usually used to detain and torture many of the people from Darfur descent and from Kordofan origin that are now in the northern state or the river RSF controlled area. And to say that right now the death sentence under the Article of 50 for civilians exceed 20 cases. And this Article 50 is misused by the SAF and the de facto government in order to say that whoever called for the war stop is against Sudan independence.
Abdelkhalig, let's expand further this debate. You have a country which has borders with 7 fragile states: Chad, Egypt, Ethiopia, Libya, South Sudan, Central African Republic, and Eritrea, all combined with 280 million people. The potential for the country to further implode will have catastrophic impact on the entire region. Still, this does not seem to be topping the agenda of the international community. Is it because of a sense of apathy over the problems of Sudan, or a prevailing sentiment that there's absolutely no way today, tomorrow, in 20 years from now, to be able to solve the problems of Sudan?
I think we're not on the list of the priorities of the international community at the moment. You look at the Ukrainian war, you look at the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We are not on the top of the list, and also the international community as well. They've gone through what I would call it a political fatigue, a compassion fatigue dealing with the situation in Sudan. Of course, the challenges are enormous. If you look at the Horn of Africa, you're dealing with a situation in Libya, you're dealing with a situation in Egypt, you're dealing with difficult scenarios in Chad, in Eritrea, and Ethiopia itself. So I think if you do not look at this very seriously, the spillover to the region will be the ramifications will be catastrophic. And there is a need. I mean, the continuation of the crisis will mean that the Sudanese people will suffocate. More will be displaced, and there has to be some sort of a solution that you could enforce it and push it for the parties to agree on.
Fortunately, we'll have to leave it there. Dalia, Abdelkhalig Shaib, and Alaaeldin Nugud, I really appreciate your time and insight. Looking forward to having the same conversation with you in the near future. Thank you. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on X. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Hashem, Ahelbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.